What if the biggest star in women's basketball had been quietly holding back, and everyone around her had no idea just how much? Caitlin Clark built her name by doing the impossible on a basketball court. She rewrote record books, sold out arenas, and turned the WNBA into must-watch television practically overnight. But behind all the highlights, behind every impossible logo 3 and record-shattering assist, there was something simmering, something she wasn't saying out loud until now. Because when Caitlin Clark finally started letting people see past the smile, what came out wasn't what anyone expected. And the coaches at the center of it all are still feeling the heat. To understand where things stand today, you have to go back to the moment that started it all, the summer of 2024. Caitlin Clark had just finished one of the most historic college careers in the history of women's basketball. She was the most talked about athlete in the country, maybe the world. Her first WNBA game drew more viewers than most playoff contests had in years. Tickets to Fever games were impossible to find. Merchandise sold out in hours. The league's social media numbers exploded. And then, at the height of all of that momentum, USA Basketball announced their Olympic roster, and Caitlin Clark's name was nowhere on it. The entire sports world stopped. Fans were furious, critics were baffled, and one question echoed everywhere. How does the most popular player in women's basketball not make the Olympic team? The finger pointing started almost immediately, and a lot of it landed on Cheryl Reeve, the head coach of the Minnesota Lynx, who was also serving as the head coach of Team USA heading into Paris. Reeve was quick to push back on the blame. She insisted publicly and repeatedly that the coach of the national team has no real power in the player selection process, that the decision was made by a committee, that she wasn't the one who kept Clark off the plane. But here's what made people not believe her. Just weeks before the roster was announced, during the Olympic selection period, Reeve had been active on social media, appearing to take subtle shots at the amount of attention Clark was getting. She liked posts that expressed frustration over how the league was promoting Clark's games over other teams' games. She made comments that, to a lot of people, sure looked like someone who had strong feelings about the Clark phenomenon, and not necessarily warm ones. For a coach who claimed to have zero influence over the roster, she seemed awfully invested in making sure people knew Clark wasn't the only story worth telling, and that's where things got genuinely messy. Christine Brennan, a veteran sports journalist at USA Today, was writing a book about Caitlin Clark. She spent months trying to get Cheryl Reeve on the record. Texts, calls, emails, going through PR channels, reaching out to USA Basketball. Nothing. Reeve never responded. Then the book came out, and Reeve appeared publicly to claim that Brennan hadn't done her due diligence in reaching out. Brennan didn't take that quietly. She went on air and fired back, saying she had the receipts, text messages, emails, documentation of every attempt to make contact, and that Reeve knew it because she had access to the same communication trail. The word Brennan used to describe what Reeve was doing? Lying. She said it with visible sadness, making clear she actually respected Reeve as a coach, but that the dishonesty was simply undeniable. The whole exchange went viral, and suddenly, the 2024 Olympic snub wasn't just a controversy anymore. It was a full-blown public dispute between a legendary coach and one of the most credible reporters in women's sports. But that was just the beginning of the coaching drama swirling around Clark's world. Fast forward to 2025, and things only got more complicated. Clark entered the season as the most anticipated player in the league. Expectations were through the roof. And then, barely a month into the year, she started dealing with injuries, one after another. A groin issue that kept getting worse, kept pulling her away from the court. Kept the fans who had been showing up in record numbers sitting in their seats, wondering when number 22 would be back. She played just 13 games the entire season. 13. For a player who had been averaging nearly 20 points and more than 8 assists a game the year before. It was a crushing blow. By September, she released a statement confirming she wouldn't return to play that year. The words she chose were carefully measured, but anyone reading between the lines could feel the weight behind them. She said disappointed wasn't even a big enough word, that she had spent hours every single day in the gym trying to get back, that the whole situation had been incredibly frustrating. That was Caitlin Clark, stripped of the usual polish, letting people in, and it wasn't the last time she would. On New Year's Eve, as 2025 turned into 2026, Clark posted a collection of photos on Instagram with a caption that got people talking all over again. She wrote that 2025 had been a year, made with the kind of pause that that speaks volumes, and that she was welcoming 2026 with open arms, ready to get after it. For a person who almost never lets the public see frustration, it was pointed. It was honest in a way her public statements almost never are. Fans read it as exactly what it seemed like. Clark was done with 2025, done with the setbacks, done with whatever had been holding her back, on the court and possibly off it, because by that point a new coaching dynamic had entered the picture that nobody was entirely sure how to read. Stephanie White had taken over as Indiana Fever head coach. And from almost the moment their relationship became visible to the public, people started noticing something in Clark's face. When the Indiana Fever shared photos of Clark reuniting with White during Team USA's FIBA World Cup qualifying camp in Puerto Rico in March of 2026, the response from fans was immediate and overwhelming. One fan wrote that Clark always looks sad or bummed out when she's around White. Another said Clark's energy completely changes when her coach shows up, that the brightness disappears. Someone else said White does nothing but hamper Clark's game. Comment after comment, fans who had spent 2 years watching Clark's every expression said the same thing. She doesn't look happy around this coach. Now, to be fair, there are other explanations. Clark had just come back from 8 months off the court. She was dealing with the mental weight of a brutal injury year. She was stepping into her first senior national team appearance, which she had described as a nerve-wracking pinch-me moment. So some of what people were reading on her face might have had nothing to do with White at all. But the pattern that fans were pointing to wasn't something they started noticing in Puerto Rico. They'd been saying it for months. And the fact that Clark, who is almost always warm and expressive with the people around her, seemed visibly subdued in those specific moments. That wasn't something people were willing to just overlook. What made it even more interesting is how things evolved over those 5 qualifying games in Puerto Rico. Clark was coming off the bench to start the tournament, not in the starting lineup, or working within a rotation that was being shuffled around constantly as Coach Kara Lawson evaluated combinations. Clark didn't complain. She was measured and professional in every interview, saying she understood the process, that USA basketball requires flexibility, that it's a work in progress, and the team needs to find its rhythm. She even said that if you don't feel excited about being in that position, you probably don't care enough, which for someone who had been denied the Olympic experience entirely just a year earlier had a whole other layer of meaning. And then she went out and absolutely performed. Against Senegal in the opening game, she put up 17 points and 12 assists in just 19 minutes, the second most assists in a single game in the tournament's history. By the end of the 5-game stretch, she was named the tournament MVP, beating out Paige Beckers and Angel Reese for the honor. Not bad for someone who hadn't played a competitive game in 8 months. And here's where the Stephanie White storyline took an unexpected turn. After Clark received her MVP award, she and White were spotted sitting together in the stands to watch the final group stage game between Puerto Rico and New Zealand. Just the two of them, side by side. It was a moment that fans couldn't stop talking about, because it was the first time in the entire tournament they had been seen together like that, voluntarily, not as player and coach during a game, but as two people choosing to share a moment. White had said publicly before the tournament that she was genuinely concerned Clark might be nervous coming back after such a long layoff, and that she was impressed by how composed and sharp Clark looked even through the adjustment. She called her one of the greatest passers the game has ever seen. So maybe what fans were reading as tension was something more complicated than that. Maybe it was just the reality of two people figuring out how to work together under enormous pressure and public scrutiny. Or maybe there's still something unresolved between them that hasn't fully played out yet. That part remains to be seen. What's not in question is how much Caitlin Clark has had to navigate, not just on the court, but in the politics that surround it. She watched a highly controversial coaching decision keep her out of the Olympics. She watched the coach responsible for her national team roster publicly dispute what a credible journalist reported, then get called a liar on air by that same journalist. She spent most of 2025 injured, fighting her way back, watching her team succeed without her, and trying to stay sane through the frustration. She played in a new coach's system with millions of eyes analyzing her body language in every photograph, and through all of it, she kept it professional, she kept it measured, she let her game speak when she got the chance to play, and when she did play, she won MVP. But the silence she's been keeping around what she really thinks about the coaching decisions made about her? That silence is starting to crack. A caption here. A statement there. A look that fans recognize in half a second. Caitlin Clark has been speaking. The question is whether the people in charge have been listening. And given everything that's happened over the last 2 years, it seems like the 2026 season is shaping up to be the moment where all of those unanswered questions finally demand a real response. From the coaches, from the league, and maybe from Clark herself.